Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's class. We are going to be discussing an excellent case study from Harvard Business School on when supply is of public interest, Roche and Tamiflu. I hope all of you are doing very well. Today's lecture actually dates back to the year 2009. And as you can see on this front slide, it has a lot to do with a medicine by the name of Tamiflu. And this medication was made by Roche. And so both of these, this company and this medication, this case study kind of deals with that. It also deals with a pandemic. And this is the H5N1 avian influenza virus. So it talks a little bit about that. And in the year 2009, there was an imminent threat of this avian influenza becoming a huge pandemic and hitting the world and potentially causing a huge amount of deaths and illnesses in the world. And so in 2009, we go back a little bit in time and we kind of explore exactly what happened regarding this pandemic, what was the planning that was taking place for this pandemic, and how the world was reacting to a potential pandemic in 2009. And so the case study actually, starts off with a statement by the World Health Organization. And so in 2009, WHO basically came out with a statement. And, they basically made an announcement in this statement where they said that an influenza pandemic is inevitable. So it will definitely happen. And they started giving the details of the pandemic that was inevitable, meaning that it was bound to happen. And so they started talking about it, and they explained that the name of the pandemic that would be hitting the world in 2009 was H5N1, also known as the avian influenza. And they also mentioned that this pandemic had already started in Asia. And it was the virus was transmitted from birds to humans. And they also mentioned that, look, this, if anybody gets this particular virus, it could be fatal. They mentioned that, the death rate is 50% in people. And, if it becomes very transmittable from human to human, then it could be a huge global public health threat. And so they basically said that this, right now it started, this influenza, and they were saying that there's a high probability that it will become transferable human to human, and this may lead to a pandemic. And so this, this case study, though it was written in 2009, actually this entire story of the whole avian flu and all of that, this actually goes back to the year 2005. So I'm going to take you back all the way to 2005. And in the beginning of this case study, the head of supply chain, global supply chain for Roche is kind of sitting, holding his head, and kind of really looking at media and realizing that, Roche has been getting a lot of bad media at this particular time. And he was, kind of trying to think about what he should do. And so one of the things that was being said in the media was that Tamiflu, which is the medicine that can help prevent getting this disease, this avian flu, was in short supply. And so the media was saying that this is a moral obligation of Roche to provide a whole lot more of Tamiflu in the world. And they were not being able to do that. And this was really something very wrong that Roche was doing. And so, by this time in 2005, Mr. David Mr. David, who was the head of global supply chain, had already been working for 14 months to try and increase the production capacity to, really fill the need for this Tamiflu drug that could help people, prevent people from getting this pandemic. And they had done, a lot of work in 14 months. They had increased their production capacity. They had tried to finish any backlogs they had of orders that they had not fulfilled. And they had done this through a whole lot of different methods. They had, worked with tech companies and outsourced production, and they had done sub-licensing agreements, and, they had increased their capacity for making Tamiflu by 15 times. So even though they had increased their capacity by 15 times, they had been working tirelessly. The media was still being pretty harsh on them in 2005. And one of the big things that this Roche and was really wondering was that, look, this pandemic, in general, pandemics happen, and then eventually a vaccine is developed and it goes away. Now, Tamiflu, let me just be very clear about this. Tamiflu is not a vaccine. However, as the case study proceeds, this will become more and more clear. But the thing is, if people were to have Tamiflu, then it would be very unlikely that they would actually get the avian flu, right? So it was a preventive measure, and it wasn't necessarily a vaccine. But the point was that it seemed like everybody, kind of all the national governments, really wanted to place a lot of orders and have stockpiles available in their countries of Tamiflu in case there was this pandemic spread. Now, the problem that Roche was saying was, okay, fine, we've increased our capacity so much. We are trying our level best to fulfill all the governments around the world, all of their requests for this drug. But all of a sudden, let's say, there was a vaccine comes out and all of a sudden there's no demand for Tamiflu. Well, what is it going to be? What is that going to look like for Roche? What are they going to do with so much of the extra stock of Tamiflu? On the other hand, if this becomes a full-fledged pandemic and it starts spreading like wildfire, because it was contained, I mean, it wasn't really spreading. There were cases, but it wasn't really spreading that far and wide. But let's say, it became very prevalent and started spreading like wildfire. How would Roche be able to, increase and make millions of additional treatments? How are they going to do that? And how are they going to do that in like very short periods of time? Because right now making Tamiflu, takes time. And if there was so much of additional demand, that would take additional time. So how, all of these questions were on Roche's mind, and they really were confused about what they should do. How much should they increase their capacity? Should they keep their, the increased network that they had made for their increased capacity alive? Should they be increasing it? Should they kind of curtail it? What should they do? So this basically, this is kind of the synopsis, right, of this case study. Really the first couple of slides really kind of tells you exactly what this case study is about. But next, the case study gives a lot more background on the threat of the pandemic. And so basically, what the case study goes on to say is that per year in general, there is a case of influenza or flu. Now, there is a difference between the common cold that a person gets and the flu. The flu is a lot more stronger, right? And so in general, every year, about 3 to 5 million people, get the seasonal flu or influenza. And actually, there's a huge number, but 250 to 500,000 people die annually from the flu. Now, in general, an influenza pandemic can happen when there is a new strain of the flu or influenza. So a different type of a flu really occurs. And what happens is if the human population does not have immunity to this new kind of strain of flu or influenza, then this can cause a lot of deaths worldwide. One of the worst influenzas or flus that have happened in history was the Spanish influenza in 1918. And because of this, 20 to 40% of the world's population became ill and 50 million people died. That's a huge amount of people. And so just to give you an idea, some other flus that have happened, pandemics that have happened, influenza pandemics that have happened include the Asian flu that was in 1957 to 1958, and the Hong Kong flu that was from 1968 to 1969. Now, what WHO does is that, whenever there is a new strain that can become a potential pandemic, they really have to, they try to alert the world. And that they have also, one of the big concerns that WHO has made very clear is that if and when a pandemic does come out, many times vaccines are not available. If they are available, they may not be enough of a vaccine. And so this is just something that has been happening. So, it's very interesting. If you watch movies, for example, there is most movies or a lot of movies I've been watching kind of forecasted a pandemic. And, many times I was like, oh my goodness, is this some sort of a conspiracy theory? Why is it that pandemics kind of have been coming up over and over in several movies in the past several years? But the truth is that these kind of pandemics were known. It was known that pandemics happen every so often. Usually they happen from animals to humans, and then they are transmitted human to human. And many times, it takes time to make a vaccine. So all of these things have been public knowledge. And, again, something like the coronavirus right now we're facing, but, this kind of pandemic did come up in 2000, in the early 2000s. Fine, it never became, really bad, but it's important to know that the coronavirus didn't just come out of nowhere. These kind of things have been happening in the past as well. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the launch of Tamiflu and this medicine. So, in basically Roche, let's talk a little bit about Roche before I get into the nitty gritties of Tamiflu. So Roche was founded in 1986 by a gentleman by the name of Mr. Hoffman, Fritz Hoffman. And he founded this, and he basically is known to have been made a big sort of mark in the pharmaceutical industry because he had a very revolutionary idea of producing medicine on an industrial scale, like on a huge, big scale, and basically selling medicine in an international market. So previously, this was not being done. Prior to 1896, medicines was being made in small amounts, for local communities, but he was the one who basically decided to do it on an industrial scale. The company Roche is divided in two divisions. There is the Roche Pharma division, and then there is also the Roche Diagnostics division. In 2006, Roche actually had sales of 42 billion, and also, so they had sales of 42 billion Swiss francs and a net income of 9 billion Swiss francs. So very profitable company, doing very well. And they basically launched an oral drug by the name of Tamiflu. And Tamiflu was a treatment and also used as a preventive measure for seasonal flus or seasonal influenza. And it was considered, of all the medication for seasonal flus, this one was considered the most effective. And because of that, it basically controlled 90% of the market share. This drug originally was discovered and made by Gilead Sciences pharmaceutical company in 1996. It was first made in South San Francisco. And then Roche found out about it, and they decided to buy the worldwide rights to develop and market the drug. So this drug basically originated in 1996, and it was patent protected. So Roche basically had a global patent, and that patent was valid till 2016, and that patent was applicable. It protected them in 30 countries worldwide. So in those 30 countries, nobody could really make Tamiflu unless Roche gave them the right to do so. That being said, this international global patent that Roche had was not, really didn't work, and the drug was not patent protected in any African or least developed country. So in those countries, also in Indonesia, Philippines, and Thailand. So in the least developed countries and in African countries, the patent protection really didn't apply. So in those countries, if they got the medicine and they were able to understand the chemical makeup of it, they could make copies of it. It was, allowed by international law. Some other things to mention about this drug, it is effective for children who are, 1 year and older. Generally speaking, as soon as you get any flu symptoms, you should start having Tamiflu within 48 hours. And for this to be effective, and it's a 75 milligram capsule, and it needs to be taken 2 times a day for 5 days. And if, however, this is if you are able to, really, as soon as you catch the symptoms, you start having it, it takes 5 days. But if you get, post exposure, a couple days later, you start having Tamiflu after you get, fully exposed and you have the symptoms, then it may take up to 10 days to recover. Tamiflu was, launched in the United States, Canada, and Switzerland in 1999 and the year 2000, and eventually in all European countries by the year 2002, 2003. As of 2007, over 48 million patients had been treated in 100 different countries by the drug. So highly effective drug. And, by 2007, it was pretty much in a lot of countries, it was available. Now, how much it was used and the market acceptance of this drug really varied, country to country based on several things. The first one, structure of the medical system, and also the attitude of patients. Sorry. Now, in some countries, patients really were able to differentiate between the flu and the common cold, and they used to, go to doctors more often who would prescribe this drug for the flu. In other countries, they kind of said, no need, it's just a cold, we will get over it. So, this really, the attitude of how frequently people would go to get themselves treated to doctors varies, and therefore the market acceptance of this drug also varied. Interestingly, in Japan, this drug was used the most. So they obviously there was a huge market acceptance. They probably used to go to the doctor very often to get treated for the flu. A couple of other things to mention about, Tamiflu is that the production of Tamiflu is pretty complex and it's capital intensive. And just to give you an idea, the production of Tamiflu takes place in 12 sites around the world. Some factories were owned by Roche and others were external production partners. So again, because this was patent protected, Roche didn't kind of just want to give, the recipe or of having this made to any production company. If they were wanting to increase their production, they would make production partners and bring them into the Roche network. And then they would sort of say that these are our partners. So just these are some things to keep in mind. It takes approximately 8 months to produce Tamiflu, and generally speaking, it's done well in advance of the winter flu season. So it's made in advance, based on demand forecast. And the shelf life for this product is about 5 years from the start of the encapsulation. And so that's kind of great because it can be used over 2 winter seasons. So let's say it doesn't sell, well, it's not that like the medicine has to be thrown away. It will go on, it can be used for up to 2 winter seasons. Um, and one thing, I kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier as well, but this product was being used the most in Japan, Europe, and United States. So this is where the highest market demand for this product was. Next, the case study talks about the Tamiflu manufacturing process. And generally speaking, there are 5 steps of manufacturing Tamiflu. And the manufacturing takes about 8 months. And so, just the encapsulation, so taking the actual powder and putting it in a capsule and packaging, that takes 2 months out of 8 months. So, the actual manufacturing takes about 6 months, and then encapsulation and packaging takes an additional 2 months. There are 5 steps of manufacturing Tamiflu, and the first one is extraction of something called shikimic acid from star anise pods via fermentation. And next, this is converted there's chemical conversion of this shikimic acid into expedite, and then the expedite is converted into azide, and then the azide is converted into an active pharmaceutical ingredient. And then finally, there is blending, encapsulation, and packaging. Now, of these steps, step number 1 and 3 are the most difficult or problematic because, the origination of this medicine is found in something called star anise. And this is, a plant. And so this is only grown in 4 mountain provinces in southwest of China. So as you can imagine, it's a little challenging to get everything sort of exported from southwest China, from these 4 mountain provinces, all the way to Roche. So yes, Roche did try and find an alternative process that doesn't require it, but the original recipe of this medicine does require this star anise. Also, in step number 3 is very hazardous, and there's a high risk of explosion. And what has to be put into it, is as toxic as cyanide. So, you're dealing with some toxic kind of chemicals, and they are explosive as well. If they were to actually redesign this entire process and try and really take out step number 3, that would take an additional 2 to 3 years. And that's something that, Roche wasn't really necessarily ready to do. So in order to deal with this step number 3, they were doing their production in small vessels at specialty chemical plants. So it was, just because it was so dangerous, so hazardous, it had to be done in small vessels at specialty chemical plants. And, these are kind of the reasons why it would take quite a long time to actually produce this drug. Now, next, the case study talks about the role of Tamiflu in pandemic planning. Now, Roche realized that Tamiflu could help in case of pandemic as a first response rather than having to wait for a vaccine. So you have to understand, as I previously mentioned, that, vaccines take time. And in general, Tamiflu is a drug that has been designed to be effective against any type of influenza, type A or type B influenza. So this was considered to be a really great way that in case there's a pandemic, this could be a great first response while people are waiting for the vaccine to develop. Generally speaking, vaccine development takes time, and vaccines can only kind of start being made once the actual pandemic has begun and the strain has been identified. So therefore, it's very unlikely that there's a pandemic, and right when there's a pandemic, the vaccine is available. Also, generally speaking, when vaccines are made, there is some sort of capacity constraint on how much of vaccines can be made. Um, Generally speaking, only 85 million treatment courses of vaccines can be made in a year. So that's definitely not enough to sort of help out the world population. Therefore, again, Tamiflu was in high demand to deal with any kind of influenza pandemic. Most, countries were made aware that, if, something like this were to happen, Tamiflu would be a great preparedness plan to, it would be great to sort of prepare for such a pandemic by keeping enough stock to distribute in the population for free in case the influenza pandemic actually spread. In 2001, basically WHO came out and said, look, every country in the world should have pandemic plans in place. And that's also around the time when Roche began engaging with all national governments. And in 2005, WHO came out and said that, an influenza pandemic could affect up to 25% of the world population. So, scientists started building models, and they basically came to realize that if the US or Europe kept Tamiflu enough to cover 29% of the population, the death rates could be halved. So, keeping a stock of, 29% of your population, if you have Tamiflu well in advance, that could help reduce the death rate by half. That's a pretty big statistic. Also, if they were to have enough Tamiflu for 100% of their population, then the death rate could go down by 80%, according to the scientists' models. And so the scientists also suggested that the more stock of Tamiflu should be kept in high-risk regions. And so this whole in the avian flu influenza was being, discovered in in sort of the South Asian countries such as, Vietnam and Philippines and Indonesia. And so these were considered the high risk regions. And it made a lot of sense for these regions to sort of keep more of the stock. Okay, now, next the case talks about, in 2005, what was happening that was causing a huge increase in the demand for Tamiflu. And it also talks about how Roche responded. So the first thing was there was a creation of a rapid response stockpile. So WHO basically met the heads at Roche in 2005 to discuss, the status of pandemic stockpiles, and also to discuss that, very few countries, only 15 countries had placed orders with Roche to sort of prepare for a potential pandemic. And most of these countries were mainly the US and Europe and a few Far East countries. Now, when WHO kind of met Roche, they kind of said, look, this is bad planning. And we, already know that this is spreading. This could be a very big pandemic. So Roche said, you know what, we will donate 3 million courses of Tamiflu to WHO just as a rapid response stock. And so it would be a fire blanket in case the pandemic really spread. And they said, look, Roche can hold on to the actual stock of Tamiflu. We'll keep, they said they'll keep half in the United States, half in Europe. And they said that, look, if in case the pandemic actually spread in any country, then Roche would help arrange a shipment to that country from the WHO stock of Tamiflu, and they would work within the country to help distribute the Tamiflu drug. So this was what, WHO was kind of really concerned, and this is what WHO was doing. They were like, if the countries or national governments are not doing it, well, they were trying to step up and help. Now, there was a growing global concern because in 2005, cases did emerge in South Asia, and WHO sent out publications, and they said that, look, to the national governments like, look, you guys really, really need to plan for this, because these kind of deaths and this pandemic is spreading and the deaths are happening. Over 2 years, 4 countries reported cases of avian flu pandemic, and these countries included Vietnam. The cases were registered in 2003, Thailand in 2003, Cambodia in 2004, and Indonesia in 2005. In the third quarter of 2005, after hearing about these kind of the spread of this virus and, the deaths that were happening in 2005, third quarter, European governments, EU governments started increasing their stocks. And so they started going to Roche and placing orders. But they basically said that, look, we want you to make these drugs, but we're not going to be obligated to buy these, because we only want to buy them if the pandemic actually spreads. Now, this was very difficult for Roche because, look, they had a very long production cycle. And, what are they going to do with all this extra kind of stock that the EU governments were asking for if the EU governments were not actually going to be using it? So, however, the EU governments pushed back and they said, look, we'll give you letters of intent, but you can't force us to give a firm commitment that we're going to buy this. So Roche really got upset, and Roche said, okay, well, in that case, we just kind of want to say that we are going to be giving this medication on a first come, first served basis. And for those countries that are place the order first, they're going to get the orders, first. And if people are going to, come in late, well, they're not going to get the medicine in time. And the governments did not react very well when they saw that Roche was putting pressure like this. And they basically said that, okay, if you're going to behave this way, well, they slapped some extra regulatory and pricing approvals on them. So Roche was kind of facing this kind of, these kind of challenges. Many said that, a lot of countries and pharmaceutical companies within those countries said that, what, Roche is just behaving difficult for no reason. This kind of drug, they're saying it's going to take them really long to manufacture and all of this. But actually those companies within these countries said that they could fix the whole situation in a couple of months. If they knew what the, ingredients were, what the manufacturing process was, they could, really fix the matter of months. And Roche, on the other hand, was saying, no, it's going to take us a really long time to sort of bring new parties up to speed. It takes 2 to 3 years if we increase our capacity and bring new people into our network. So there were, certain things that were kind of going, all these kind of things were roaming around, in the circuit, in the global circuit, and being discussed. Now, in September 2005, Roche. Now, in what happened around September 2005, around Labor Day, was that, Roche got a very interesting call from the United States government Health and Human Department. So they had been working with the Health and Human Department in the US government. Around 2005, they were well on their way to increasing their, capacity, production capacity. But it was a very interesting phone call that they got in September 2005 at the head office in Roche. And, the HHS department from the US government called and said, hey, can you guys make 200 million treatment courses of Tamiflu? Now, this was 4 times larger than Roche's total annual capacity. This huge order was based on the assumption that there would be a pandemic, and that if there was a pandemic, then transportation and borders would be closed. So there would be no transportation through borders. Now, when they got this phone call, the head, Mr. David, the head of global supply chain at Roche, immediately called a meeting with the most senior people to address 3 issues. The first one was, how would Roche scale up capacity to meet growing global demand and the HHS request? So how are they going to meet this huge production capacity? Number two, how would Roche compress the production cycle time to maximize delivery while capacity was being scaled up? So obviously they could not take as long as they usually would to make this kind of delivery. They would have to decrease their lead time, increase their production cycle. And finally, how would Roche address the communication challenge and address concerns about its ability to supply? So, how are they going to do it? And how are they going to basically communicate within their organization? So three basic things: increase of production. How are they going to do it? Number two, how are they going to increase their production cycle, so decrease their lead time? And finally, how are they going to do their internal communication? So these were the three big challenges that the head of global supply chain at Roche kind of identified. Roche, did have a response, a supply chain response. They did come up with a response for this entire problem. They said, look, in order to fulfill 20% of the world's population of 6.4 billion people at that time, they realized 1.3 billion treatments of Tamiflu would be needed. And they also realized that Roche's current capacity at that time was, in 2005, was 55 million. So, on one side, just a total capacity of 55 million versus, potentially a demand of 1.3 billion treatments. That's a huge gap. They knew that they needed to increase their capacity, but, how much? So they basically said, you know what, they decided to increase their capacity from 55 million to 300 million within 18 months in the US. And they basically said that all of these, 300 million treatments would be made in the US, and they would be registered in the US and available for sale anywhere in the world. Generally speaking, Roche manufactured and encapsulated products in-house. So they did, because it was patent protected, they didn't want to kind of outsource production to anybody. And this basically helped them ensure reliable supply and quantity. They would need to increase the existing infrastructure outside of Roche. So obviously Roche itself, its own production factories were not big enough to make this kind of production levels, meet these kind of production levels. So they would have to increase, increase by making partnerships with external people and basically increasing their production network thereby. Because they realize that, look, building new plants it would take too long, and this pandemic may happen at any time soon. So basically what Roche decided was, number one, they would go out into the global market and they would try and find potential external people who they could make an alliance or partnership with. And they would really assess those, people for their physical infrastructure and their technical know-how. And if suitable, they would potentially buy the infrastructure and transfer the technology, and product qualification would then start. Now, what is product qualification? Because that word is something we haven't really discussed so far. So product qualification is basically making sure that the supplier has got all the right certifications with the regulatory authorities, and that they would be manufacturing using the registered processes of Roche. So again, first they wanted to identify the right suppliers, and then really make sure that those right suppliers, they had the right, technology, they had the right qualification, to sort of manufacture these things, and also that they were registered with the right authorities. Now, they also realized that a technology transfer Roche realized that the technology transfer usually takes 12 to 18 months plus 24 months. So that's a long time. We're talking about close to almost 2 years. And since they were aiming to sort of do everything in 1.5 years, increase their production capacity in 1.5 years, they would have to act fast and also really reduce the number of checkpoints. This plan of, developing this sort of supply chain response was shared with WHO and government. So this is, something that they were all sort of told of what they were planning to do. They said, Roche decided that they would really try and lower their cycle times and expedite their transportation. Also, they would use air travel because this would really help decrease the, transportation time. When Roche reached out to the world to sort of invite potential partners, 300 companies applied to sort of develop these partnerships. While Roche was doing all of this preparation to increase their production capacity, media in general was portraying Roche really negatively. And they were saying that the public health, should come before profit, and that Roche was just being, holding back. They had this patent, they weren't ready to share it. They were just thinking about their own profit. Many companies said that they could provide the medicine of Tamiflu a lot faster, and there was a lot of pressure on Roche to forego its intellectual property and to reduce its capacity crunch and really share how Tamiflu was made with others. And so there was a senator in the US called Senator Charles, and he actually said that, the Tamiflu patent should actually be completely discontinued, and so that others can produce Tamiflu. Now, Roche, when they heard about all of this, their main approach was to become more proactive and to communicate what they were doing to increase their capacity in the media. And so they had a huge media conference, and they sort of invited everybody and really told them everything they were planning to do. And exhibit 4, 5, and 6 in the case study really goes and talks a lot in detail about all they said to the media. And interestingly, one of the exhibits also shows that, after this media sort of conference that they had, how generally speaking, the media backlash started decreasing, and people around the world became more positive towards Roche. So once I think everybody, the media, the public in large realized that Roche was actually doing everything it possibly could to increase its production capacity rapidly, they became less, aggressive with Roche. So, in January 2007, by around this time, there was, a new supply chain design in place. And so basically what Roche said was that in the next 14 months, they would work to build and register and test the network, execute a production plan to finish the backlog. And they basically developed a list of, they shortlisted 19 suppliers, of which 3 were internal. And they basically made, chalked out their entire process, and they found suppliers to help, who they would integrate with, how they would, work with them to increase their production capacity. And they also kept a backup supplier for each, in case their main supplier for any reason didn't qualify. And so, Exhibit 7 really sort of shows exactly how they were building their new supply chain. And again, for them, step 1 and 3 were the hardest to find. It was hardest to find suppliers for both of these steps. And, also another big thing, but they managed, they were able to manage. They were also, the health authorities around the world really helped give quick approvals. So that basically saved them a lot of time. Basically by 2006, so all of this had started in 2005, right, building their new supply chain. By 2006, Roche increased their capacity to 148 million treatments, and the lead time went down from 8 to 6 months to ramp up the production. Again, by January 2007, they had really increased their production capacity as they had originally decided they would do. So it took 14 months, but they were able to really, work through their plan and actually deliver results. Okay, next, the case study talks about ensuring global affordability and access. And so again, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, there was a lot of backlash. People were saying Roche is only just caring about making profits. So Roche went out and they really sort of worked with governments to determine prices. They also basically, they didn't exactly give out the information of how much quantity and what time the orders were being were placed for Tamiflu, but they did announce the targeted stockpile that every country was aiming to have of this drug. As of January 2007, 35 countries plan to stock enough to cover 5% of their population. And the stockpile targets range from 5% to 55%. Countries such as India and China, that didn't follow the US laws. Roche gave them the license to manufacture Tamiflu themselves. And Roche, really didn't check and have any visibility into the process. They just kind of gave the license and charged a small fee, a royalty fee from these companies in China and India. But the drugs started getting manufactured in bulk in both of these countries. Some countries like Taiwan tried a similar approach of just getting the license from them to manufacture Tamiflu in Taiwan, but they realized that, look, if they actually started manufacturing it, it would be pretty much the same price that Roche is offering Tamiflu for internationally. So they decided there's probably hardly any pricing difference. So they decided to just buy it directly from Roche. So after many negotiations and all of that, Roche did come up with a multi-tiered pricing structure. Now, one thing to sort of mention that without the pandemic, the Tamiflu was available for between 20 to 51 euro in developed countries. So that was what it was, before the pandemic. But because of the pandemic, Roche decided to offer, in developed countries, offer the full course of the drug for 15 euros. And for lower middle income countries and for low income countries, they were willing to offer the drug for 12 euros. Also, they were willing to sell, and they were selling it in powdered form at 7.7 euros in developed countries and 7 euros in low to mid income countries. But of course, if you were giving it in powdered form rather than encapsulating it, the administration of it, how much people are actually taking, I mean, that was sensitive. So it was more promoted to actually buy the encapsulated drug. Roche donated a stockpile of 2 million to WHO. Additionally, in April 2006, to create a second rapid response stockpile to be held for Asia and Africa. So, Roche, in addition to sort of working with all the governments, continued to sort of keep a special stockpile for WHO as a rapid response. So the first rapid response they had, but this was the second rapid response stockpile that they decided to keep. Also, it's important to mention that Tamiflu was also being made for children. This drug was available for children, and so it was also being made for them. The case study finally sort of rounds it up, takes you to 2007. So the case study really ranges from, 2005 to 2007, and it takes us to January of 2007. And by this time, Roche had fulfilled 200 million courses of Tamiflu for government stockpiles. And, they usually had a demand of 30 million. So in total, they made 230 million courses by January 2007. And they felt that, the remaining, whatever remaining orders they had, they would be complete by mid 2007. And there was no indication of any future orders. They were kind of sitting at the edge of as to whether or not the pandemic would happen. Obviously, if the pandemic happened, they felt that, their production network would increase substantially. And if it didn't happen, they kind of had to figure out what they would do with the excess stock. Moving forward, there were several key questions that Roche had to answer. The first one was how to keep the network's capacity alive. At what levels should Roche be ready to respond if an actual pandemic were to happen, or if there's a change in government attitudes? And number two, what should Roche do and what should they announce? So again, the media had played a very big role, and they had to have a very good strategy to deal with media as well. So the case study kind of ends with this. And yeah, and I think that this is a fantastic case study to really kind of understand that, what happens when there are pandemics, the kinds of issues that pharmaceutical companies go through, the kind of global supply chains that need to be made, the kind of arrangements that have to be made, and the challenges that pharmaceutical companies have. So vaccines, for example, right now in coronavirus, there are various companies that are making the vaccines. Is it a one time thing? How often would these vaccines need to be administered? Much.